Rabbi Yakov Horowitz, thank you for joining me today once again on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Oh, it's really an absolute pleasure, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's always nice to speak with you as well, Rabbi Horowitz. I'd like to start off by asking you about Kesher families. Can you tell me when Kesher was founded, why it was founded, and what in particular does it offer to people?
Kesher Families, it's kesherfamilies.org if anybody wants to look them up. It was started in March 2022 by Rabbi Menachem and Rabbi Adina Penner. They have a son, Gedalia, who is gay, and they struggled with it for years, trying to figure it all out. They didn't have that level of help, and it was a number of years ago. And I mean, thankfully, they secured a relationship with him, and they wanted to share what they've learned to help others. It was just an incredible act of generosity of spirit. They're just incredible people. They devoted their lives to the community. As a Rav and a Rebbitzin, he was Rosh Yeshiva YU for years and years. They took my wife Udi and I out to dinner many years ago, and shortly after they found out, they were also trying to do their very best to be the incredible parents they are and try to figure it out. The elevator pitch is that no parents should have to go through this journey alone. That's really the governing principle, is that people shouldn't have to go this alone. There's such a steep learning curve. Parents have to, as soon as they find out or they suspect that a child may be LGBTQ, there's so much that they have to learn in such a short period of time. And, they provide support and guidance to parents, specifically to preserve essential family units, to help create a community, which is so important to, be in a room with people that understand you and understand what's going on. It offers peer-to-peer learning and to give the parents a hashkafic grounding so they can remain strong in their relationship with Hashem, which is, a very, very big deal when parents are trying to sort this out. So they provide consultations with the penners and the Kesher rabbis, myself being one of them. They have wellness events, support groups run by their mental health professionals, presentations, open Q&A for parents with their staff. They have a phenomenal, phenomenal retreat, a Shabbos retreat that was, a couple of months ago. That was just extraordinary. And in response to requests from communities, they do educational scholar in residence program as well as training for school leadership.
Okay. Has there actually been blowback towards Kesher families from some elements of the Orthodox community, as best you know?
None that I know of. I've been working in this space for almost 10 years. And every responsible leader, I'm not talking about radicals. I'm saying every responsible person understands the complexity, understands that parents who are faithful to Torah and want to be faithful to their children and want to do the best they can. Nobody thinks this is something that's easily done. And the biggest proof of it is that they've grown. I mean, right now, there are 260 member families of Kesher families from 11 countries. About 40% are modern Orthodox, a little less than 40% are from yeshiva background, 11% Hasidish, and 10%, Syrian, Persian, Bahraini families, former Soviet Union. All the services are free of charge except for the Shabbaton, and that's really subsidized heavily for income eligible families. And there's a tremendous emphasis on confidentiality, which is really important to get folks comfortable to access their services and to be comfortable that their confidentiality will be maintained. Some families don't want to keep it confidential. That's their choice. But, for the families that do, it's incredibly important.
Of course, that's very, very important. Absolutely. Rabbi Harowitz, though, how did you specifically get involved in this space? You said that Rabbi Penner took you out for a dinner 10 years ago. That's a far cry from becoming actually someone who works with Kesher families. How did you become involved?
Thank you for asking. I mean, it's we've discussed lots of topics, including two sessions on your amazing program. I don't shy away from difficult subjects. I feel that the public voice that I have ought to be utilized for things that are so important. I've always tried to be approachable I've always tried to present an image that I'm a regular person that people can come and talk to about things. And, honestly, Reb Scott, I do have a hierarchy. There isn't enough time in the day to be able to respond to people that are wonderful parents who are looking for help and things. And I have honestly like a hierarchy, sort of a triage, and I ask myself, do these people have others that they can talk to? In other words, someone uh, that they're having marital difficulty, they have a child that's not in school. It's of course it's extraordinarily important, but there's lots of people they can go to. So over the years I've tended to slide over to issues that people don't have that access, which is why I started dealing with child sexual abuse, over 20 years ago, because that was something that people weren't talking about. There was one big, giant step forward. I was at a panel for Jewish Heritage Center. They had three of us on a panel. Rabbi Moshe Bain, who was the head of the OU at the time, the president, and Eitan Kobri from Mishpacha magazine, and myself. And they asked us questions. They had a fundraiser, and we were the show. And they asked the question about LGBTQ issues, and I responded the way I respond. You hear me respond here with honesty and sensitivity to the best of my ability. I posted the video on my Facebook page when it came out. It got 15,000 views overnight, and then my phone started exploding. This was 8 years ago, and I was very happy to when the Penners got started, had my eye on it. And then I said that I'd like to devote, I'm working there part-time, but I did want to devote a block of time to this very holy mission, as I see it.
As you've been involved in this holy mission, have there been things you've had to learn or unlearn, theologically, pastorally, or otherwise?
Yeah, yes. I mean, the steep learning curve goes for rabbis too, I did reach out to leading Gedolim, the leading sages of our generation. In fact, one person that I specifically had been asking questions to for over 20 years, I asked him if I should start getting into the space. I described what was going on. And for the first time in over 20 years, he told me in Yiddish, he said, you must do this. I don't remember him ever making a declarative statement like that. He said, you must do this. And I said, can Rebbe please explain? And he said it's pikuach nefesh, it's life and death. Because of the complexity of the issue and the fact that the LGBTQ folks have to make such difficult decisions that impact their family. What's most frightening is when people feel that they don't have choices in terms of their family and they say, well, it's either this or that. And it weighs on them. So many of the LGBTQ individuals that I've spoken to, they want to stay religious. They want to stay with their families. They want to stay in the community. It's honestly less complicated for those who want to leave. It's who also want to have relationships with their families, but especially those that really weren't looking for this. They're just trying to figure it out. It could be so emotionally devastating, and that's what the rabbi told me that I must. He told me in terms of my hierarchy, I should really see to it that I spend some serious time trying to help out the families.
But then let me ask you about some of your conversations with Gedolim, obviously preserving their anonymity. Well, first of all, do you feel that there's a difference between private guidance you've received and public messaging, or is it relatively consistent as best as you see it?
That's a fantastic question. With all issues, what you'll hear privately is not necessarily what someone discusses in public. If you're asking me, do the rabbis that I've consulted with, do they speak publicly about these issues? Not that I know of, but they're certainly approachable to people who seek their guidance. It's an individual. It's really a question of an individual situation for each and every parent, and that they should deal with it is as their family unit in the best way that they can to try to, help support their child and let them know that they're loved and supported.
Are there any specific principles that you've heard repeatedly from different Gedolim who, in talking about this, certain ideas are bolate? They come out over and over again in your conversations?
To understand the Nisayon, to really deeply, deeply understand. I think people who are glib about this, and it pains me so much when people post things that are insensitive, especially on social media, because it tends to get around so much. If anyone stops and spends a few moments thinking about the Nisayon, the incredible test that people have to be faithful to the Torah means an incredible, incredible sense of self-sacrifice. I mean, all the Gedolim that I've spoken to have dealt with this in very significant ways. If you live your own life and you have your own synagogue, shul, or your own school, and you're not accessible to the public, you could possibly skate by and people won't come to you with questions like this. But the top tier, especially the top tier Gedolim, they deal with this. They deal with this all the time. And one of the things that I keep hearing from the young men and women, they say like, why don't people at the very least understand what what this means to us? One of the young men said it to me, so it's so memorable to me. He said, we call Yosef Hatzadik, Jacob's son Joseph. He had a tremendous spiritual test he was tested by his boss's wife tried to seduce him. And we call him Yosef Hatzadik because he rejected her advances. And he says, like, I'm being tested for my whole life. This is what the kid told me. I've heard so many incredibly poignant comments from young men and women. One of them, a mother called me and told me that she was talking to her son, who was gay and was seriously contemplating getting into a relationship. And he said, "Mom, I'm not rebelling against you and Daddy. I'm not rebelling against you. I want what you have. I want a beautiful home life. I want to have children. I want a family. I want to love and be loved. I can't do it with a woman." When you hear, I think anybody who's thinking of responding and you know getting into this space and think deeply about what's really going on and listen. Right after that video I mentioned, 8 years ago when I started getting more into this space, my wife and I invited 12, 15 LGBTQ young men and women to our home for lunch because I said, I told Udi, I told my wife Udi, she's amazing. I mean, she supports everything I do and is such a wonderful mentor and is so wise. I said, I don't know enough about this. So we invited them over to our home for a 3-hour lunch on a Sunday. And I learned so much from it. I learned so much from it.
That's very, very powerful, Rabbi Harowitz. And it leads to a very important question, a difficult question. You talk about what you learned from talking to the LGBTQ youth that were in your house and talking to Gedolim. People listening to this podcast are largely Orthodox people, and I'm sure many are saying to themselves, how can we balance deep and genuine faith in the Torah's teaching, the oral Torah, and having respect and empathy for LGBTQ individuals and their families? Not that we shouldn't have empathy, but you're emotionally and I think correctly saying they want to have families and they can't do it with a woman. And yet the Torah says you must. I'm
Right?
speaking about a boy. Obviously, a girl would
Right.
be the opposite.
So theologically, of course, it is a great challenge. I think it's the nuance here that's so important. One of the rabbis at the Kesher event, we had a closing lunch on Sunday, and he quoting Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, he spoke about the Gesher Tzar Ma'od, that narrow bridge. Kol Olam Kulo, the whole world is a narrow bridge, and one should not be afraid. We should walk with a clarity. That's what Rabbi Nachman of Breslov was saying, one of the Hasidic masters. And he said that all of us in the room here, we're walking this narrow bridge. In other words, there's extremes on two sides, but the narrow bridge that says we love our children and we love God and we accept our Torah. Though of course it's challenging. That's why it's a narrow bridge. That's why we're doing what we're doing. I often think to myself that these two things can be true at the same time. I read that Ani Mammon, that Maimonides has 13 attributes of faith that we're obligated as Orthodox Jews to believe in. So 8 and 9 is that the Torah that we have was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, and that Torah will never be changed. And we believe that with faith. At the same time, I'm going to read you, I don't think I never sent this to you. Did I? A mother's prayer.
No, no.
A woman named Yocheved Lindenbaum, who has a gay son, she actually came to my back porch many years ago and begged me, pleaded with me to get involved in this space. She's a chaplain. She was a chaplain and was doing pastoral counseling of the sorts. And she wrote it like a prayer that we would read Friday night, before candle lighting or something. I'm sorry, I'm going to lose it, but I think the audience should hear it balanced with the two animaments of the Rambam of Maimonides and understanding exactly what the prohibition is and that it's a serious prohibition. Here's what she wrote. Elokai neshama shenasata li tahorihi. God, the soul that you entrusted to me is pure. Ata barasa, you created it. Ata yitzarta, you formed it. Ata natata barachmi, you planted it in my womb. V'nafachta chayim bekirba b'yam holadato, and you breathe life into this child. Modani lefanecha. I stand before you, Ribon Kol Hamasim, Master of all creation. Al zeh shenasata li hayelad hazeh, that you gave me the gift of this child, l'shamro, to watch him, ul'avo, to love him, ul'gadlo, and to raise him, lamad l'fnei kisei kvadecha, and to raise him to stand before your godly throne. Avinu avarachman, merciful Father, psachas libo, open his heart, her son's heart, lahargish es yodecha, to feel your loving embrace, despite everything that's going on. Chazek yadav, strengthen his hands, lasot b'vadasech, to serve you. Ushmar al nafsho v'gufo, and watch on us. Protect his soul and his physical being. And that gufo, we know what that means. That gufo was the self-harm. That gufo was a frightened mother saying, please Hashem, keep an eye on my child. I want to make sure that he's emotionally well. Gal, and she concludes, Gal einei levavos avdecha. This is turning to the public. Folks out there, this is for you. This paragraph is for you. Gal einei levavos avdecha. Open the eyes and hearts of your servants. Liros es malosav, to see his positive attributes. L'chabidus neshmaso, to respect his neshama, his soul. V'karev oso, and bring him close and circle him, l'toch chek amecha, to the embrace of your nation. So those are the two things. Those are the Gesher Tzar Ma'od, that narrow bridge is trying to figure out those two things at the same time. And many parents feel that they have to choose between Hashem and their children. And at Kesher, we believe that Hashem blesses us with our children, and our mission in life is to be the best parents possible to them, to raise close to us, close to Hashem, close to our family. I encourage people to separate public policy versus treating individuals. The public policy are very, very, very difficult decisions that our leaders need to make about issues of this nature. Do we welcome LGBTQ couples to our synagogues, our shuls? If a child comes out as LGBTQ in a school, what do we do? How exactly does that mean? It's difficult, thorny public policy issues. But that's not, civilians aren't supposed to be busy with this. That's what I tell people. It makes me nuts when I see people writing nasty things and posting memes. And unfortunately in America, I don't know how much you feel it in Israel, but in America, this LGBTQ issue has become such a political football. People are throwing stuff back and forth, these memes, and it's so hurtful and it's so unnecessary. Civilians have no business with that public policy issue. Even I don't. I say I'm not here to formulate public policy. It's way above my pay grade. People say, yeah, but the Torah says so, right? Is a positive commandment to admonish someone who's not following the Torah. But there are laws about that also. I tell people posting a meme on social media isn't a fifth cousin to what that is supposed to look like. Hillel said, "Not don't judge people until you, as in Pirkei Avos, till you understand them." How could anybody possibly understand? I don't understand it. I'd like to think I understand it more than the average person in the street, but I don't. How could I possibly say that I understand what the kids are going through, what the parents are going through? To be honest, there are families that get upset when people treat it as a tragedy. This is what Hashem gave me. Nobody has a right to say what's right or wrong and what they should or shouldn't be doing. But we need to figure this out.
That's a very, very powerful tefillah that you read, and I appreciate, Rabbi Harowitz, that you shared that with all of us. It's a lot to think about and a lot to internalize and to realize the pain that that mother was going through, obviously, to feel the need to publicly write that beautiful tefillah. It's a genuine expression of kavanah, of directing thoughts towards Hashem, as well as towards the people reading it, to say this is how she hopes people will look at her son. She knows Hashem will look at her son that way, but she certainly hopes that other people will have the same compassion and
Right.
the same sense of
And that's what,
understanding him.
that's what the kids want. I asked the kids around the table when I finished the lunch with these young men and women, I asked them, what can I do to help you? What would you like me to do? What can I do? It broke my heart. The kid said, tell people to stop saying hurtful things to us. That was the number one request. And I looked at them, I said, that's it? That's all you want from me? They said, yeah.
You
That's
have
what I
to
said.
wonder where the motivation comes to say hurtful things or to post painful memes, or as you said, it's not even a fifth cousin to scolding that the Torah says you should do in certain circumstances under definite conditions. You wonder why people feel the right, never mind the need, to say hurtful things in any context. It's just bizarre, honestly.
I don't get it. Some people think that that they're being holy people by doing this. I told there's somebody who's been very outspoken about this issue. I called him up. I said, I'm not God, but if I was God and you were hurting my children like this, who are so vulnerable, and I gave them such an assignment, such a test, I don't know what I would do to you. I said, I would lose it. I said, how do you, well, of course it's an important issue. I'm not saying, of course, and these public policy issues need to be addressed. I asked all three Gedolim that I spoke to them for 3 hours, each of them, 2, 3 hours. I mean, what do I answer a child who says, why did Hashem make me this way? And what does he expect me to do? Where a man or woman says this, or parents of a kid, like what? And they each said, I'm telling you that the pain was so evident on each of their faces, the weight, of the families they're comforting and trying to help. They basically said that it's the same type of question of why people from birth have other struggles. People are struggling with infertility or other situations, people losing parents at a young age. I mean, I can't even imagine what you're all going through in Eretz Yisrael. I can't even imagine. I lost my father at 3 years old. It's still a stressor on my faith with Hashem. I have faith, of course, but you know, as I get older, I was saying when I was a little kid, I felt bad for me. When our children were growing up, who had time to think? But now as I get older and I see what he missed, you're Baruch Hashem, you said you just had a grandchild, right?
Yes, I had two grandchildren. Yes, our
Two
first two.
grand. We know what a gift it is. So they didn't say it glibly. Of course, you have to believe in God. When I asked them that question, they were pained. So that's what we should be doing, just with empathy, just talking about it with the understanding that it's sensitive, it's a sensitive issue, and that people have to make such difficult decisions.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. I'm thinking back to what you said before about that young man who came to you and said that Yosef Atzadik was called a tzaddik because he overcame a specific test with Potiphar's wife. And he said, I have tests every minute of the day.
That's what he said.
And thinking about that right now, for what it's worth, we often think in binary that It's either yes or no. And if Yosef had, imagine, failed that test, would he be Yosef HaRasha? Of course not. Maybe he wouldn't be Yosef HaTzadik, but he'd be Yosef, the typical human being who
Right,
sometimes makes mistakes and sometimes gives into the test and sometimes defeats the test.
right.
I just mean that for that particular person, when he says he has these tests all the time, it doesn't mean, well, if you don't give in, you're so and so HaRasha, chas v'shalom. That's not what we're saying.
Right,
I think that's,
right.
yeah.
As we would with any other situation that people deal with. And part of what the young men and women and the parents and family members are saying is, why don't we at least have an understanding? The kids that are younger, the kids find out when they're, let's say, 12, 14, 16, they're not, it's not about intimacy then. They're not doing sins at that time, I'm saying. That it's so much more than that. They're not, it's orientation. So I didn't even do anything yet. It's so complicated. And I know more than a few young men that I tried to mentor and help and who came to me for advice who took their lives after realizing, when they feel that closing in on them. It's just so heartbreaking.
One of the most difficult things is when a child feels their parents are disappointed in them. That feeling of disappointed,
Right,
that's
right,
terrible.
right.
Now, sometimes a parent is disappointed. That's a human emotion. And at the same time, when a child approaches a parent and comes out and says, I'm gay, I'm homosexual, I have a same-sex attraction, how does a parent respond in such a way that the child will feel loved and accepted for who he or she is? They won't feel their parent is disappointed in them. And at the same time, I want to say my question really also involves the parents, that they should be able to say something which is genuine and not just putting on a face which isn't real. Because if they say, this is great, I'm so happy for you, and they don't feel that inside, the child will know that too. He'll understand that it's a
Absolutely.
line and it's a lie. So how does a parent do that?
There are some parents who have the attitude that this is my child, this is how Hashem made them, and I accept as is. We don't have the language. I've been saying this for quite some time. In other words, you have the words empathy, understanding, kindness, acceptance. I can give you 8 more of those words. What exactly does that mean? Empathy, acceptance means I accept that this is who you are and we love you unconditionally and will always love you. Doesn't mean that we're endorsing it. We really don't have. I wanted to make a dictionary one. I really wanted to make a tool like this, tell people, here's how I feel. I actually made something for parents when parents tell me we're on different pages. Our child came out to us and we're not on the same page. I actually made 7 choices. Like top would be, we fully accept you completely. And the other one would be, sorry, this is not going to work for our family.
And then some more in
But
between. In other words, a ranking of different kinds of
right.
ways of
In
reacting.
other words, to help the parents say that, well, I'm over here. The other parent says, I'm over here. And then they can talk about how to bridge the difference. There are so many different types of responses that parents can have. The best thing is, I think it's certainly okay and normal for parents to say when they find out that, whoa, we just need to process this. We don't want to, we just need some time or whatever. We're going to go seek some advice and but to tell a child we love you, this will not affect our love for you, is hopefully something that parents can tell children. And then you get into the logistics of a set of house rules,
What
of
do you mean? Can
how,
you give me some examples of what you're referring to?
well, think of a child abandons religion, right? So 30, 40 years ago, it was common practice. Very often parents would tell adult children who were no longer observant that they would have to leave the house, let's say. I wrote a number of articles about this, by the way, encouraging parents not to send them away. And that has shifted tremendously in the past 30 years. It's not that response is not the same. But let's say they could say, look, we understand that you're not religiously observant, but when you come to our house, we want you to wear a kippah, let's say a yarmulke, or we want you to do. So this gets, of course, is much more complicated, especially if the children get into relationships. But the reason that I created those 7 options was to help parents make it more concrete in their minds that they could talk about possibly getting together on the same page. And that's just one of the resources that I'm trying to help create to help parents navigate things and figure them out.
Again, with the realization that, of course, parents, if they have time to think about it in advance, then these are things they can discuss with other parents or with someone who can help them out. If a parent is confronted with a child saying that I'm gay, to what degree can a parent be honest about how they feel? In other words, obviously, you're saying they have to express unconditional love. Clearly, I assume you agree with that. But alongside that, should they keep their thoughts to themselves, or can they be honest about their own presumably grieving of having a child who is not what they thought that child was going to be,
Right.
even if they love that child unconditionally?
It's a very wise point and question. I tell people not to say things they don't mean. An answer would be, we need to think it over. We're going to get guidance ourselves. It is for many a grieving you said you used the word grieving. It's not only for death. I just mentioned to you before, I have a spine condition, serious spine condition, ankylosing spondylitis. I was diagnosed 14 years ago. It totally changed my life in terms of I devote 4 or 5 hours a day to it. I went through a grieving process, realizing that there are some things that I'll never be able to do anymore. And some things, thankfully, I've been able to actually claw my way forward a little bit, but it's different. It's not something that I was expecting. We have to go through this. So I wouldn't tell parents to say things they don't mean. It's okay to say, we would like to get there, or we want to think it through. If possible, to express to the child that we're going to do it together. That's the point. It's a journey. You've been on this journey. You didn't tell us about it. You didn't know it yourself. You've been doing this alone. Now you don't have to do it alone. We'll figure it out together. We're here to help you. I think that's the most honest and best things people could say, at least in the short term.
I'm going to ask a controversial question now, Rav Horowitz.
I'm so shocked, Rav Scott. So not like either of
Yeah,
us.
unlike me. If a parent were to come and talk to you and say, we really would like to try to change my child, we really would like to try and get him or her back, quote unquote, on the derech
Of
of
being
opposite
straight.
sex attraction,
Right.
some sort of,
Right.
what would you tell that parent at that point?
I would say with absolute clarity that reparative therapy is extraordinarily dangerous and should not even be considered. This idea of reparative therapy, the research clearly shows that that's not effective. It is possible that, and this does come across a lot, a young man or woman, especially in the schools that we sent our children to, in the Haredi schools where genders are separated when they go to school, they feel an attraction to the same gender. It's perfectly normal to tell parents that they should go talk to a therapist about it, a credentialed therapist, not someone like me, not a nice, well-meaning person like myself. I would never, ever, get involved in that. And to talk things over, to try to figure it out. But to say that we're going to change you in this reparative therapy is extremely, extremely dangerous. It's not something that anyone should be doing. We should be exploring. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to go through. They should be guided by a competent, credentialed mental health professional who has experience in this space. I think it's good for parents to go as well.
And once a child says that I am declaring him or herself gay, lesbian, or
Right.
any category like that, the assumption has to be the child knows himself, and we shouldn't say, well, maybe you're wrong. Maybe you don't really know yet.
That's correct. I've asked many parents when it comes up in discussion, when did you find out? And some people say we knew from a very young age. I've heard this from many, many parents that like we saw when a child came out, we expected it basically. Like they would go out to couples for Shabbat dinner. Boys would go outside and play ball or do, and our son would go off with the girls and play with them. And they noticed things very, very early on. And some people said it just hit them in the back of the head. They had absolutely no idea. So it depends, it's there are no rules. I mean that's why it's so important to have an organization like Kesher Families where people can ask these questions. When they ask them questions to me, right, I say I'm not qualified to answer this because I don't have professional training. And honestly, even though I've dealt with hundreds of families, I don't have the expertise to be able to answer you, but other parents certainly can.
That's one of the most important points that we've made repeatedly on this podcast is that sometimes people who are well-meaning cross boundaries they don't realize they're crossing, thinking they're experts in areas where they're simply not experts. And that can be the most dangerous situation of all when people, often rabbis, believe, I'll call it believe their own PR, that they're geniuses who can opine in areas where they actually have no training. Oy vavoy lanu, bad things happen when that takes
Yep,
place.
yep.
Okay, you mentioned before sending your kids to Haredi schools. I'm curious from your vantage point, have you seen any difference between the Haredi communities and the modern or Central Orthodox world when it comes to addressing these issues?
By definition, Haredi communities are typically more insular and intentionally try to shelter their families, themselves and their families, from what's going on in the outside world. So it would certainly stand to reason that modern Orthodox families, generally speaking, would be more comfortable having these discussions, let's say. But I think that, what you mentioned is like right, left. I think that there's an enormous vertical divide, and that's by age. I think there's probably a bigger difference, or at least as big a difference, in how people from different age groups view this whole LGBTQ issue. I found that it's very, very profound. Like the younger the kids get, the people are, I think the more likely they are to at least be understanding about this. That's also something that people should keep in mind when they're looking for advice, when they're looking to talk things over with other families or people who've already been there and dealt with it. Very, very often, younger people tend to be more understanding, which poses a very big problem when people go over the top in response to this. People who have public voices, generally speaking, doesn't sit well with the younger generation. I have people, I mentioned earlier about the political memes that people send around. I have some friends of mine who do stuff like that and are outspoken and say things they shouldn't about this. And I ask them, say, tell me, what do your kids say when they hear you say things like this? I promise you, Reb Scott, this is usually the way it goes down. They say, my daughter, my son, whatever, they say I'm a Neanderthal, I'm a horrible person, I sound like a slave owner or whatever. And I tell them, you better be careful, buddy. Just this might come back and kick you when you'll tell this child down the road that religion is a beautiful thing. You might get a real kick from what you're doing right now in a way that you cannot anticipate now. I know like, a number of families, they have a child who is valedictorian in Hebrew and English and, elementary school and high school. I know specific examples of this and like beloved by all of their friends. And then all of a sudden they come out, in all likelihood, the kids are not going to just cut off ties with them and not talk to them again. It's the age, just like other things. There are so many other things that are so age related.
Yeah.
When people tell me, hey, what's with it, and the parenting, not to do with LGBTQ issues, what's with these kids today? They're on the phones, whatever it is. So I was doing a workshop in the Five Towns Shabbos afternoon, and it was all mothers. The guys were all watching the kids, and there were about 100, 120 women at a private home. And they said, what's with today's kids? I don't understand. So I said, please raise your hand if you polished silver in the last 6 months. Raise your hand if your mother or mother-in-law wanted to gift you some silver that's been in the family a while and you said no. So when we got married, everybody had a break front with silver, and that was, that's what people did Friday afternoon.
Right.
Today's kids don't do it. It's just different. It's like they buy different kinds of furniture. They think differently. Life is different. And I think attitudes are very, very generational. It would be very helpful for people to keep this in mind.
Rabbi Harowitz, one of the big issues we hear all the time are trigger words. And sometimes the idea of a trigger can be scoffed at. You say, oh, just grow up, learn how to deal with things. And to a certain degree, I understand that as well. On the other hand, I also understand that there are specific words and specific phrases and ideas that can be painful for people. And obviously, we need to have a balance between being so careful we can't say a single thing versus using terminology that actually is painful for people who are dealing with any given issue. So, in the case of families of LGBTQ kids, can you name some of the words or some of the phrases that, when speaking either to the parents or parents speaking to their kids, we need to avoid because we don't want to unintentionally cause pain by saying something which we didn't mean anything by it, but they're going to
Right.
take it possibly in a way which will be very hurtful?
Right. So I'd rather not say say those words. Obviously the issue of toeva is a huge one. Toeva means abomination, and that's what the Torah uses to describe gay relations. I encourage people not to bandy it around. Everybody knows without that word what it means. It's very hurtful, for people to hear, especially when it's done not from a place of empathy. I tell them that the LGBTQ young men and women are more familiar with that word than you are. You don't have to share it with them. They get it. They know what it says. I know a lot of parents of kids, of LGBTQ kids, very, very from very deeply, deeply religious and spiritual, that walk out of shul when that portion of the Torah is read. It's too hurtful to them. You know, we just it is so there's so much pain and confusion, things that people are trying to juggle with this. Just be mindful, be careful. Be careful of what you say. Please be careful of what you say. It really matters. I know specifically some parents of LGBTQ kids who actually moved out of their neighborhoods because they were so upset that their friends abandoned them, when stuff happens. And they just feel so alienated and so hurt by this. So we could do what we can to be good friends. You don't have to even say anything. Just, and by the way, let me be perfectly clear. Leaving LGBTQ issues out, there are there's Jewish law, there's halachos on what to say in a shiva home. Most of it is what not to say, right? We're instructed
Sure.
specifically, listen, don't talk because you don't know if the other person wants to talk. So people say the most insane things, good, nice people, that don't mean to hurt anyone, but just like say the most inane things that there's precedent outside of this area. Mind your words. That's all. Just mind your words. Overall, I am very hopeful. Not that the Torah will change, but that attitudes will change. This is the third major issue that I've dealt with in my adult life. It was teens at risk in 1996 and child sexual abuse in early 2000s. And things changed dramatically. We published a child safety book together with ThoughtScroll. We have two versions in Hebrew. I think I gave you a copy of the book. We're in 155,000 homes already. Who would have believed that 20 years ago? I'm an optimist at heart, and I think there's a lot of room for positive improvement without compromising one iota of Jewish law. I was in a restaurant. I went out to dinner with my wife. I saw parents, Hasidish, fully Hasidish, a couple, parents who have a transgender child. They have a boy who transitioned to a female, and it was her birthday. And they walked into the restaurant, which is people in their community, with the child and all of their children celebrating the child's birthday. All four Hasidish grandparents came. And I didn't think that I would see that for a long time. And I dealt with the couple. So I know what it was like with the extended family and how much of a journey they all went on to do this. And I think I did not discuss it, of course. I never talked to families that I spoke to unless they speak to me. I never, ever, ever bring it up. I tell them usually, if I don't say something, it doesn't mean they don't care. I will never bring it up if you don't. It was unbelievable to see that in a public area. And I really believe that the parents wanted to make a statement to their child that not only is it okay at home, but we're not embarrassed to go out to a public place with you. I think everybody, every single person listening to this can do something to improve things a little bit. The story goes, somebody asked the Kotzker Rebbe, how could Hashem create a world filled with pain and cruelty and all of that? So the Rebbe said, you think you can do something to improve it? He said, of course I can. So he says, okay, so do it. Get started. I mean, and it starts with being approachable and accessible. That people can come and talk to us about things. I'm seeing things that make me more positive about where things are headed.
I want to add one thing, if it's okay, to what you just
Please,
said in terms
anything.
of that idea of being non-judgmental. One thing which I've been talking to my wife Eliza about recently is this concept of being dan l'chaf zchut, which means to judge for the positive, to assume the best. When people talk about judging for the positive, that's actually on some level, I'd say, b'diavad. That's already in the not ideal situation. Obviously, the worst thing is to judge negatively. Judging positively is only when you're forced to judge someone at all, but even better. Don't bother judging. No one's asking for your opinion. If you are not personally involved in some sort of monetary dispute where you have to render an opinion or you have to feel one way or the other, if something involves two people or three people or one person that has nothing to do with your life, you shouldn't be judging kihu zeh at all. So even saying, let's be dan l'chaf zchut, let's assume the best. How about don't assume at all and just have compassion and love and don't work on this idea of I'll judge them favorably. You shouldn't be judging at all.
We finish each other's sentences when we talk. You know, I tell people when people come and tell me stuff, judging others, I say, imagine if you were in court, traffic court, you busted a red light, and now you're in court trying to fight the ticket, and you're waiting while the other cases before you are adjudicated, right? And somebody gets up and says, I drove through this and that, and everybody's looking at the judge. I said, imagine if you got up and you said, guilty, or not guilty. The bailiff would come, grab you by your shirt and walk you out. Why? Because you're not the judge. So I'm not, in my sojourn in this world, I'm not a judge. That's not my job. It's not my job. I'm not God. I'm a proud Torah Jew. I'm proud of following our Torah and the values that we have, especially in this issue, but other issues like this also. We're not, that's not our space. It's not our space. It's not our job to do. It's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to make life more comfortable for other people, not make them more uncomfortable, especially people who are dealing with such sensitive issues.
I think it was Rabbi Nachman of Breslov who once said that it's very easy to make people feel bad, to make someone feel good. That's impressive. And it's something which I try to tell my kids all the time that has to be our avoda, to try to bring joy into the world, to make people feel better. We can't always do it, but if there's no reason to bring pain to people, do everything we can to give them compassion and love and joy to the degree that we can.
Right. And sometimes it's as simple as just, putting your hand on a friend's shoulder. Many people just struggle to find the words to say, but people know intuitively who's sincere. You can't fake that. You can't fake that. People know who's empathetic and who cares and who's trying to lighten the burden of other people around them, rather than, God forbid, do things to cause them more pain. And I think it's a good lesson for life for all of us in all endeavors to do what we can to be accessible, to be good friends. I heard a thought from Rabbi Shia Fishman, was the head of Torah Mesorah for many years. And he talked about Job. Now he tells us that God was boasting about this incredible person, Eov, And the Satan, so however we understand this, so the Satan comes to him and says, of course, you give him everything. He's got money, he's got family, he's got beautiful. Let's take that stuff away from him and see what happens. And Hashem tells him you could, but you can't to him, but not take away his life. And he lost his money and his family, and he suffered, terrible pain. And then afterwards, it says that his friends came to comfort him. And Rabbi Fishman said, why didn't he take his friends away? And he said, because he said, you can't kill him. God told the Satan, you can do anything to him, but you can't take his life. And taking someone's friends away that's their nefesh, that's their life.
Wow.
And I mentioned earlier about people who left their communities because they felt so uncomfortable and disappointed. Nobody should lose their friends over this. Nobody should have to lose their friends over it.
Okay, well, on that note, I think we'll stop here, even though there's much more we could talk about. Rabbi Horowitz, it's always a joy to speak with you, even when we're speaking about difficult topics. I think this is very, very important today, and I appreciate your honesty and your compassion. So thank you for joining me today.
It's kesherfamilies.org, folks. The services are all free except for the Shabbaton, and even that's subsidized. Please, if you're out there and you're trying to figure this out, please, please don't do it alone. Nobody should have to. Nobody should have to go through stuff like this alone. Get help for yourself, for your child, for your family, and hopefully we can make the world more comfortable for more people. Thank you so much, Rev Scott. Thanks a million.